When a dusty, golden-brown puppy pawed at Leo's leg in the crowded market, everyone assumed the same thing. The stranger reached into his pocket for food, like anyone would. But the puppy didn't even glance at the sandwich. Instead, those wide, urgent eyes stayed locked on Leo's face as the tiny paw pressed against his jeans again. And again. And again. Leo knelt down, broke off a piece of chicken, held it out. The puppy turned away. He placed a bowl of water on the ground. The puppy took one sip, then barked, sharp, insistent, and started walking toward the shadowed alleyway, stopping every few steps to look back with an intensity that didn't belong in something so small. This wasn't begging. This was something else entirely. Because strays don't ignore food when they're starving. They don't lead strangers into dark alleys unless they're desperate. And they don't keep touching your leg like that unless what they need isn't food at all. It's a witness. What Leo found when he finally followed would reveal exactly what that puppy was trying to say. Leo wasn't supposed to be at that cafe. He'd only stopped because his phone died, and he needed to check the time before heading to the shelter where he volunteered twice a week. The market was loud, vendors shouting prices, motorcycles weaving through the crowd, the smell of grilled meat mixing with exhaust fumes. Just another Tuesday in a city that never slowed down. Then he felt it, a paw pressing against his shin. Gentle but insistent. He looked down. The puppy was small, maybe 8 weeks old, with golden brown fur matted with dust and eyes that seemed too alert for something that young. Most strays Leo encountered would approach cautiously, ready to bolt at the first sudden movement. This one stood firm, watching him with an unblinking stare that felt almost confrontational. Leo smiled, assuming he knew what this was about. He'd done this 100 times. He reached for the leftover chicken sandwich on his plate, tore off a generous piece, and held it out. The puppy's nose twitched. He could smell it. But instead of lunging forward like every other hungry stray, the puppy simply looked at the food. Then back at Leo. Then at the food again. And walked away. Not far. Just 3 steps toward the street. Then the puppy stopped, turned his head, and stared directly at Leo with those enormous, dark eyes. His tail wasn't wagging. His ears were pinned back slightly, the way dogs look when something's wrong. When they're afraid. When they need help but don't know how to ask. Leo felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't normal behavior. The puppy took another step, stopped, looked back again. Waiting. And that's when Leo understood. This wasn't begging. This was a request. Leo's first thought was illness. Maybe the puppy had eaten something toxic, or had an infected wound that made eating painful. He'd seen it before. Dogs too sick to eat, their bodies shutting down while their eyes still begged for help. He grabbed his water bottle, poured some into the empty bowl the cafe owner had left on the table, and crouched down. "Hey, buddy. You thirsty?" The puppy approached immediately. His pink tongue lapped at the water once, twice, 3 times. Then he stopped, lifted his head, and let out a bark so sharp and sudden that the woman at the next table flinched. It wasn't aggressive. It was urgent. The puppy turned and started walking, not wandering, walking, purposefully toward the narrow street that led away from the market square. After 5 or 6 paces he stopped, turned his entire body around, locked eyes with Leo, waited. Leo stayed crouched by the table, watching. The puppy barked again, softer this time, almost pleading, then took 3 more steps. Stopped. Looked back. That's when it clicked. Leo had volunteered at enough animal rescues to recognize trained behavior when he saw it. Search and rescue dogs did this, moved ahead, checked if their handler was following, adjusted their pace accordingly. But this puppy was too young for formal training, too scruffy to belong to anyone. Yet here, he was, executing the exact same pattern with an almost eerie precision. The puppy wasn't asking Leo to follow him randomly. He was guiding Leo somewhere specific. Leo stood slowly, his heart starting to beat faster. The market noise felt suddenly distant, muffled. The puppy's tail gave one small wag, not playful, but relieved. Like he'd finally gotten through. Then he turned and started walking again, this time not stopping, confident now that his message had been received. Leo followed. The puppy didn't take him far before the world changed. One moment they were at the edge of the market, sunlight bouncing off tin roofs and painted shop signs. The next, they'd slipped into a narrow alley where the buildings leaned so close together that the sky became a thin strip of gray overhead. The noise of the market faded to a muffled hum. Leo's footsteps echoed off cracked concrete walls tagged with faded graffiti. The puppy moved faster now, his small body weaving around piles of cardboard boxes and broken furniture that had been dumped and forgotten. Leo's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. The alley branched into another, narrower still, where weeds pushed through the pavement and the air smelled like rust and standing water. The puppy broke into a trot, his breath coming in quick pants. Every few seconds he glanced back over his shoulder, and each time his eyes held something Leo had never seen in an animal before. Not just fear, but desperation. Awareness. Like he understood exactly how much time they were losing. "Hey, slow down," Leo called softly, but the puppy only moved faster. They turned another corner. The alley here was barely wide enough for Leo's shoulders, hemmed in by a chain-link fence on one side and a graffitied concrete wall on the other. Trash bags slumped against a dumpster. Somewhere nearby, water dripped steadily onto metal. The puppy stopped abruptly. His whole body went rigid. He let out a single, piercing whine that made Leo's skin prickle. Then he started digging at something, frantically, desperately, his tiny paws scraping against a pile of weathered wooden pallets stacked haphazardly against the wall. And from somewhere beneath them, Leo heard it. A sound that didn't belong to any dog. Leo froze, his breath catching. The puppy's digging intensified, his claws scraping wood with a frantic rhythm that bordered on panic. Splinters flew. His whines grew higher, more urgent, almost human in their distress. Okay, I'm here," Leo murmured, dropping to his knees beside the pallets. Up close, he could see they'd been stacked deliberately, forming a makeshift barrier across what looked like an old drainage access point half buried in the alley wall. Rust streaked down the concrete. The grate had been pried away long ago, leaving a dark, narrow opening that disappeared into the earth. Leo pressed his ear close to the gap between the pallets. There it was again. Faint, muffled, barely audible beneath the city's ambient hum. Not a bark. Not a whimper. Something weaker, more desperate. A sound made by something small and exhausted and running out of time. His pulse spiked. "Hello," he called into the darkness. "Can you hear me?" The sound stopped. Then came again, slightly louder. A whimper that cracked at the edges, followed by a soft scratching, like tiny paws against wet stone. Leo's hands moved before his mind caught up. He grabbed the top pallet, heavy and waterlogged, and heaved it aside. It crashed against the dumpster with a metallic boom. The puppy immediately shoved his head into the newly open space, barking once, sharp and commanding. Leo pulled away another pallet. Then another. His muscles burned. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The opening grew wider with each piece of wood he threw aside, revealing more of the drainage tunnel, a concrete pipe maybe 18 inches in diameter, angling downward into blackness. And there, barely visible in the dim light filtering down, Leo saw movement. A shape. Small. Trembling. Trapped. Leo pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and angled it into the pipe. The beam cut through the darkness, and his stomach dropped. It was another puppy. Smaller than the first, with the same golden brown fur now matted black with mud. The drainage pipe sloped downward at a steep angle, and at the bottom, maybe 4 feet down, murky water had pooled. The puppy stood in it, shaking violently, its chin barely above the surface. Its eyes reflected the light, wide and glassy with exhaustion. "Oh God," Leo breathed. The water was rising. Not quickly, but steadily, likely seeping in from an underground source or recent rain. The puppy's legs trembled with the effort of standing. How long had it been down there? Hours, at least. Maybe since dawn. Leo lay flat on his stomach, reaching his arm into the pipe as far as it would go. His fingertips brushed empty air, still 2 feet short. The pipe was too narrow for him to fit inside, and too steep to climb down without getting stuck himself. The trapped puppy let out a weak whimper and shifted its weight. Its front leg slipped. For a horrible second, its head dipped below the surface before it scrambled back up, coughing. Behind him, the first puppy barked frantically, pawing at Leo's shoulder. I know, Leo said, his voice tight. His mind raced. He needed something long, something the puppy could grab onto or that he could use to hook under its body. He scanned the alley, broken pallets, trash bags, a rusted bicycle frame. There. A length of rebar, maybe 3 feet long, with a bent hook at one end. Leo grabbed it, his hands shaking now. The trapped puppy's breathing was labored, its movements slower. He didn't have much time. Leo positioned himself at the pipe's opening, gripping the rebar with both hands. The hook at the end was crude, bent at an awkward angle, but it was all he had. He lowered it slowly into the darkness, his arm extended as far as the narrow space would allow. Come on, buddy, he whispered. Just hold still. The trapped puppy watched the metal descend, too exhausted to react. Leo tried to slide the hook beneath the puppy's chest, but the angle was wrong. The rebar scraped against the pipe wall with a metallic screech. The puppy flinched, whimpering. Behind him, the first puppy had gone completely silent. Leo could feel him there, pressed against his shoulder, every muscle tense. Watching. Waiting. Leo adjusted his grip, lowered the rebar again. This time, he managed to work the hook under the puppy's front leg, threading it carefully through the narrow gap between chest and water. The puppy trembled but didn't pull away, like it understood this was its only chance. Okay, Leo breathed. Nice and slow. He began to lift. The puppy's weight was almost nothing, but the angle was brutal, the pipe's walls scraping against the rebar as Leo pulled upward inch by agonizing inch. His shoulders burned. The hook started to slip. No. Leo adjusted his grip, wedged his other hand into the pipe for leverage, and pulled harder. The puppy rose through the darkness, water streaming from its matted fur. Its eyes were half closed now, head lolling to one side. One more pull. The hook caught on the pipe's edge. Leo yanked hard and the puppy came free, tumbling into his waiting hand. A small, cold, trembling bundle of mud and exhaustion. The first puppy exploded into motion, his silence finally breaking into a series of sharp, joyful barks. Leo lowered the rescued puppy gently onto the concrete, his hands still shaking from adrenaline. The little one lay there motionless for a moment, sides heaving with shallow breaths, eyes barely open. Mud caked its face so thickly that Leo could hardly see its features. Then the first puppy was there. No jumping. No excited circling. He moved with immediate purpose, pressing his body against his siblings, and began licking, methodically, urgently, at the mud crusted around the smaller puppy's nose and mouth. His tongue worked in steady strokes, clearing the airways first, then the eyes, then the ears. The rescued puppy's tail gave a weak twitch. A tiny whimper escaped its throat. The first puppy paused, touched his nose to his brother's, then continued cleaning. Leo sat back on his heels, watching, and the full weight of what had happened settled over him like a blanket. This puppy, this 8-week-old stray, had stayed by that pipe. Maybe for hours. Probably crying, probably digging until his paws bled, probably shoving his head into that dark space over and over, trying to reach his brother with nothing but determination and desperation. And then he'd done something extraordinary. He'd understood, somehow, impossibly, that he couldn't do this alone. So he'd left. Left his trapped sibling in rising water and gone back into the chaos of the market to find help. Not just any help. He'd searched until he found someone who would actually listen. Someone who'd proven they cared about strays. Leo's throat tightened. You knew, he said quietly. You knew exactly what you were doing. The first puppy lifted his head briefly, meeting Leo's eyes. Then he returned to his brother, curling around him protectively, still licking, still warming, still refusing to leave his side. Leo wrapped both puppies in his jacket and carried them back through the maze of alleys toward his car. The rescued puppy, Lucky, he'd already started calling him in his head, stayed limp and quiet. But Hero, the one who'd led him here, kept his eyes open the entire walk, watching the world pass, as if memorizing the route back. At Leo's apartment, the bathroom became a makeshift recovery room. He filled the tub with warm water, not too hot, and lowered them in together. The water turned brown almost instantly. Hero stood protectively over Lucky, who could barely lift his head. Leo worked gently, using a soft cloth to dissolve the mud caked in their fur, revealing the golden brown coloring beneath. When he finally set out 2 bowls of food, warm rice mixed with shredded chicken, both puppies ate. Not frantically, but steadily, methodically, like they'd finally decided it was safe to be hungry. Leo had to look away, unexpected emotion tightening his chest. The vet visit the next morning confirmed what Leo already knew: exhaustion, dehydration, minor scrapes on Hero's paws from all that digging. Nothing that wouldn't heal with rest and care. The vet examined Lucky's legs, checking for injuries from the hours spent standing in cold water. Miraculously, everything was intact. "They're tough little guys," the vet said, scratching Hero behind the ears. Hero tolerated it for exactly 3 seconds before returning to Lucky's side. "Hero and Lucky," Leo confirmed, watching them. "That's what we're calling them." The vet smiled. Fitting. 2 weeks later, both puppies had transformed. Their fur was fluffy and clean, their eyes bright. But they were never more than a few feet apart. Where Lucky went, Hero followed. Always watching. Always ready. For weeks after that day in the market, Leo sat on his apartment floor watching them play. Hero had gotten bigger, his movements more confident, but he still had that same intensity in his eyes, the awareness that had made him different from the start. Lucky tumbled over his own paws chasing a toy, clumsy and carefree in a way he'd never been allowed to be when survival was the only thing that mattered. Hero paused mid-play, walked over to Lucky, touched his nose to his brother's head. "Just checking," then returned to the game. Leo thought about that day constantly. How easy it would have been to ignore a persistent puppy. How many people had probably walked past Hero in that market, assuming he was just another stray looking for scraps. How close they'd come to tragedy because Lucky's silent suffering had been invisible to everyone except his brother. Animals don't have words, but they have language. They have intention. They understand more than we give them credit for, about loyalty, about problem-solving, about who to trust when the world has given them every reason not to trust anyone. Hero had known. He'd assessed the situation, recognized his limitations, and made a choice that most adult humans would struggle with: to leave someone he loved in danger, temporarily, to save them permanently. He'd read Leo correctly, identified him as someone who wouldn't just offer food and walk away. That tiny puppy had recruited a rescue mission. And sometimes Leo realized the smallest creatures carry the biggest lessons. Listen when they speak. Pay attention when they reach out. Because sometimes that gentle paw against your leg isn't asking for a handout. Sometimes it's asking you to be a hero too. But here's what haunts Leo the most. He almost didn't follow. He almost stayed at that cafe, assuming Hero was just another beggar. He almost walked away because helping seemed inconvenient, because he had somewhere to be, because it was easier to offer food than attention. If he had, Lucky would have drowned in that pipe. Hero would have returned to an empty, dark hole. And 2 puppies who deserved a chance at life would have become another tragic statistic that no one ever heard about. How many other heroes are out there right now, trying desperately to get someone's attention? How many silent cries for help go ignored because we're too busy, too distracted, too certain we already know what they need? If this story moved you, don't just watch and scroll past. Hit that subscribe button so you'll see the next rescue we share, because every view, every share, every comment helps us reach more people who might be the next Leo. Someone who'll stop and listen when an animal is trying to tell them something important. Share this video with someone who loves animals. Comment below and tell us. Would you have followed Hero? Have you ever had an animal try to communicate something urgent to you? And if you're able, consider supporting animal rescue organizations in your area. They're full of volunteers like Leo, people who choose to pay attention when others look away. Because the next time you see a stray acting strangely, remember Hero. Remember that their persistence isn't annoying, it's desperation. Their unusual behavior isn't random. It's a message. Don't be the person who walks past. Be the one who stops. Be the one who listens. Be someone's hero.